Before this video begins, I want to ask you a question. If you could monetize the very essence of your life, would you do it? Would you trade your time, your lifespan, or your health for money? That's not something you need to answer right now, but keep that in mind as you watch this video. Hello everyone, it's Whadasha, and I haven't made a video like this in quite some time. I like to save these for the moments where a story actually means something to me, and that just so happened to be this story. Today, we're going to be covering I Sold My Life for 10,000 yen per year, a manga that teaches us how human life can't be assigned a value through harsh realizations, trials, and a shared sense of worthlessness. If you guys enjoy this video at any point, please go ahead and subscribe. Leave a like as well, especially if you want more videos like this going forward. Consider becoming a member for access to all videos early. And with that said, let's begin. The story begins with a flashback. Two children in a quiet spot, separate from the intensity of the ongoing festival. In the middle of the hustle and bustle, the two children, finding solace in their mutual dislike of the world around them, make a promise. In 10 years, when they turn 20 and they're famous, if they haven't found anyone to marry yet, then they'll marry each other, coexisting as two unwanted people. This flashback, though it lasts for less than a full page, is the introduction to the story. One moment we're at the festival, the next we're witnessing the reality of life 10 years down the line. Unlike what he'd imagined, the boy isn't famous. Far from it. He's swamped in work, collapsing from dizziness, all while apologizing to the customers for making human mistakes. However, in an almost comical sense, despite slaving away during work, at home he doesn't even have a meal to eat, or really anything to reflect his efforts. The only thing he could do, as sad as it is sell his remaining items, his CDs and books. After being questioned by the bookstore cashier on why he'd do something so wasteful and giving him the harsh truth, he resonates with the boy's circumstances and in turn provides him with an interesting offer. You want to sell some of your lifespan? According to the old man, a place not too far away had been buying lifespan from people at a supposedly extraordinary price. But given the nature of such things, the price they'd pay for lifespan differed from person to person. It wasn't a sell some of your life, get rich sort of deal. It was a sell some of your life and maybe make some money sort of deal. To shorten everything, it was sketchy. Taking what the man said with a grain of salt, the protagonist continues his journey, planning to sell off his CDs next. However, at the CD store, as strange as it was the same story again. There was a shop in town that would purchase lifespan. However, just like before, the details were kept super vague aside from the location of the store itself. So at this point, it almost seemed like fate. That exact same day, he'd find himself standing in front of that suspicious shop, and immediately upon entering, the first person that greets him asks him, your time, your health, or your lifespan. Nothing more, nothing less. So following what the people before him said, he chooses his lifespan. And following this, his evaluation begins, where the higher-ups are deciding how much this individual is worth. And it's at this moment where the protagonist is reminded of an experience he had in his childhood. One where he was taught that if a life was monetizable, it would have no set value. However, even then, when he was just a boy, he thought that if push came to shove, he still may end up selling. It's also in this moment where we learn quite a bit more about the protagonist, who we'll be referring to by Kusunoki from this point onward. Kusunoki, as far back as when he was a child, believed that he was well above others. We even see some of that during the intro. Kusunoki and this mysterious girl believe that in the future, they'll be famous, basing it off of nothing besides their egos alone. That's the sort of person that Kusunoki is. This will be explored more a bit later, but in summary, that is the sort of life that Kusunoki has led. Returning to the present day following the evaluation, Kusunoki is finally told the value of his life. To his surprise, his value is 3. The first thing that came to mind. 3 billion, just like he thought. But no. 300,000 yen yearly. This came in the form of a gut punch, but it wasn't the worst of the news. Kusunoki had received the bare minimum amount of yen one could obtain. And since Kusunoki only had 30 years and 3 months left to live, and he sold off 30 years of his life, he'd be left with only 300,000 yen in total. That amount would never build since he wouldn't live to see another year. But even then, that wasn't the end of the bad news. Kusunoki, clearly upset about all this, asked the lady by which metrics they're measuring everyone's life. And though she can't give a concrete answer as she's not the one in charge of the decisions, she estimates that it's based on a few factors. Overall happiness, how much they contribute to society, and other things like that. This was a roundabout way of saying that in the eyes of the world, Kusunoki is deemed to be worthless. Upon leaving the shop with only 3 months of his life remaining, drunk and surrounded by the silence of the world around him, it's here where Kusunoki is forced to revisit his life. How exactly did it end up this way? Where did it all go wrong? The answer is the very beginning. During his childhood, he believed himself to be above others, keeping close the idea that, in the future, he'd grow up to be famous. But because of that same ego, people around him gradually grew indifferent towards him. They had no patience for someone who arbitrarily held themselves to such a higher degree. Everyone except Himeno, the girl from the intro. Himeno and Kusunoki both stood atop the class when it came down to grades, and though they often quarreled because of this, deep down, they were the only two people who could sympathize with each other's circumstances. Egotistical childhood friends who made a promise. That's what they were. But this section makes you wonder, if life is like this for Kusunoki, what is life like for Himeno? Is she famous? Did she succeed? These thoughts are cut short as Kusunoki is brought back to reality by the ring of the doorbell, and to his surprise, it's the same girl that evaluated him yesterday. Her name is Miyagi, and for the time being, she'll be acting as his observer. According to Miyagi, after people fall below a year of their lifespan, they become desperate. To counteract that, the observer system was created. For the next 3 months, Miyagi will remain by Kusunoki's side, watching his every move, only leaving 3 days before his life is ended. Miyagi marks the start of a new period in Kusunoki's life, one where he's forced to confront his past decisions, whether he wants to or not. Unsure of how to spend his remaining few months, Kusunoki decides to make a list of the things he wants to do before he dies. And naturally, one of the items listed was to tell Himeno how he feels. But strangely enough, in the middle of writing this down, he's stopped by Miyagi, stating that doing so would only spoil his memory of her. But it's following this where we see something interesting. Thus far, Kusunoki has been pretty accepting of the fact that in just about 3 months, he will be dead. But as time naturally passes and the reality sets in that he really only has a few months left, a sudden urge for human connection would creep through. Someone, anyone, it didn't matter who. The first person he decides to call is a girl who was previously interested in him back in college, who he intentionally kept a strict distance towards. However, the line is met with silence, but that's only natural. His whole life, he spent it believing that he's better than others, never reaching out and only adding distance to all his relationships. It's only when things look grim that he decides to reach out to someone. Convenience. He only needs people when it's convenient. While his friends at one point may have liked him, he'd long missed the opportunity to reciprocate. And in Miyagi's own words, "You reap what you sow," as you are the one who rejected her. Henceforth, there will never again be a person who comes to love you. The fact that you see people as a means to fill your lonesomeness is much more transparent than you seem to think. A nail to the chest. A truth that couldn't have been said any better. As painful as it is, this chapter would only be the beginning of Kusunoki's long list of realizations, and the following chapter is a testament to that. Once again, drunk, yet desperate to make a change with his remaining few months, before anything can even happen, Miyagi reminds Kusunoki of the harsh reality regarding his circumstance. The reason why his value is so low in the first place is because in his 20 years on this planet, he wasn't able to make a single change. If he couldn't do anything in 20 years, why would he be able to do it in just 3 months? Pierced by the truth in Miyagi's words, yet still being unable to accept that he's truly worthless, Kusunoki desperately asks, what would have happened had he not sold off those 30 years? Would things have changed? Would things be better than the life he was leading now? While Miyagi can't give an exact answer, as the future is never quite certain, she is able to give the disturbing, but very likely possibility. To begin with, Kusunoki's time in school would fly by, and he'd do nothing besides read, listen to his CDs, and pay rent. Eventually, after working so much, his only solace would become the alcohol waiting for him at home. His only hobby, riding his bike, would turn fatal, resulting in him being the sole victim of a tragic accident. And feeling the weight of the world pushing against him, he'd consider taking his life. However, in the end, he couldn't quite give up. He'd keep pushing, holding on to that sliver of hope, living to the age of 50, but still dying alone. Remembered by no one, loved by no one, adamant in the fact that it shouldn't have been this way. As sad as it is, selling off those 30 years of his life was likely Kusunoki's best decision. And that alone is very, very sad. But clinging to Miyagi's words that the future isn't set in stone, that gave Kusunoki the will to keep on striving. Staring at his list of things to do, almost lifelessly, Miyagi points out that it doesn't even seem like these are the things that he truly wants to do, prompting a response that says quite a bit about Kusunoki. Maybe the truth might be that there really isn't a single thing I want to do before I die. It's a short but human revelation. If you were aware of the time in which you had until your imminent death, you'd likely think that you have quite a long list of things that you wanted to do. Theoretically, you would have all the time in the world, yet no time at all. That is the human response to this situation, at least in my eyes, but in Kusunoki's case, this hints at something deeper that the story has been building towards since the very beginning. He has nothing. He doesn't particularly have a goal that he wants to achieve, no places that he wants to go. Without directly saying it, it is oh so clear that Kusunoki is just living, and when we look back at this manga in retrospect already, then yeah, we see that. From slaving away at work, selling everything in his house, having no food to eat, simply existing day by day. So taking a step back, rather than immediately following what's written on the list, Kusunoki decides to change his thought process. What already exists that's worth fixing? The first thing that comes to mind is his relationship with his old high school friend, Naruse, who despite their opposite standings at the time, actually was pretty kind. Now, before we continue with the Naruse section, something interesting is also revealed here that I want to briefly talk about. Miyagi to other people is entirely invisible, only Kusunoki can see her. Right now this is trivial, but this will spring up later, so just keep that in mind. The following day, during his reunion with Naruse, their interaction is reminiscent of what they had all those years ago. They can talk peacefully, laugh about pointless stuff, and eventually make Kusunoki forget that his life is soon to be ended. All until he's reminded of the sort of person that Naruse is. Someone who mocks the things that others are passionate about without batting an eye. And right there, in the middle of their conversation, he grows a hate for the person sitting across from him. The one thing that seemed worth fixing turned out to be yet another dead end. Overwhelmed by Miyagi's assessment of the situation, of Naruse's rejection of the things that he loved, he throws his glass at the wall, barely missing Miyagi, but taking his anger out on the world, leaving Naruse behind at the restaurant. None of them can overwrite the message here that has been echoed since the very beginning. Over the years, Naruse had changed. However, deep down, Kusunoki hadn't. Perhaps he had never even cared for Naruse to begin with, but rather, what he was after was validation. Validation via Naruse's approval of his thoughts. Through him, he hoped that he could love himself. This section stood out to me while reading because, unlike earlier in the story, Kusunoki doesn't go silent after being met face to face with his life. Not only does he accept it, but he even puts it into words. This is by far the most vulnerable moment for Kusunoki and the first step to acceptance. Following his encounter with Naruse, a harsh pill needs to be swallowed. Even though he's dying soon, the world won't magically get nicer. Because of that, he needs to revise his view of the world, and not cling to the idea that things will just naturally change if he brute forces his way through everything. The first thing that came to mind was to write a will. But to whom? After thinking for only a few moments, the first and really only person that came to mind was Himeno. But finding himself constantly unsatisfied by the contents of his letters, he'd be brought back to the last time that he even wrote a letter, which was 10 years ago, where he, along with his class, wrote letters for their future selves, and at the end of their letters were instructed to write the name of their current best friend. That becomes Kusunoki's next plan of action. Raid the time capsules and read what his class wrote. Kusunoki himself also does admit that this decision was quite spur of the moment, more so being to just pass the time, but regardless, he'd still spend a full day digging, and eventually would find the time capsules. Upon opening them and reading each one, to no one's surprise, only his name out of every letter was excluded, and Himeno's was missing. The only person who would have written his name down was absent, hammering home the fact that there's really no one. He really is worthless. And it's here that Miyagi, a character who's typically reserved, finally breaks the ice and gives Kusunoki her thoughts that she's been alluding towards since practically the beginning. You ought not cling onto your past relationships, as you have just neglected all of them. Did you ever send Miss Himeno a letter? After high school, did you once contact Mr. Naruse? Why did Miss Wakana abandon you? Did you show up to any class reunions? Pardon the remark, but don't you feel that clinging to the past now is asking too much? She's right. It's the truth that Kusunoki would never admit. If he did, then he couldn't hold on to any more vain hope. However, even still, this is the truth that he already knows deep down. The future for him is shut off. The past for him is shut off. In a way, he's sandwiched in between the middle of this almost desolate limbo. One where he's in a constant loop, never quite making progress and only moving backwards. Miyagi has answered his questions over and over. Who can he cling to? Who can save him? Nothing and no one. And as tragic as it is, that is no one's fault but Kusunoki's. Now, initially I was gonna skip this part, but I think briefly covering it would be worthwhile. Following Miyagi's statement, Kusunoki is pretty broken, so much so that he ponders doing something quite intense, not really caring about whether he's executed or not for doing so anymore. For the sake of making money, I'm gonna tiptoe around it, but essentially he asks a hypothetical. If he were to get violent with Miyagi or do things with Miyagi by force, how long would it take for the higher-ups to terminate his life? It's a very disturbing moment, but also a very humanizing moment, I want to say. It's the reality of Miyagi's job that even Kusunoki acknowledges, having to deal with weirdos like him, people who go crazy before they die, taking their anger, their stress, and their desires out on the observer whenever it's convenient. But at the same time, this raises a question for Miyagi. Why exactly would she take such a dangerous job? What does she gain? The truth of Miyagi is a little deeper than what you may think. While Kusunoki sold his lifespan, on the other hand, Miyagi sold her time. This wasn't a decision that she would have wanted to make ideally though. Her mother, who she could never quite wrap her head around, sold decades of her time in order to buy more lifespan. However, while on duty as an observer, she would be killed by a subject. But because of the enormous debt that her mother left behind, even after selling so much of her time, by the time she actually would be free, her life would pretty much be over. After spending so long enduring such a job and seeing such cruelty constantly, is freedom at the end really even worth it? This is something that Kusunoki questions, and that's fair. Is it worth it? Your whole life you're seeing people go crazy, spiral, fall to rock bottom. How could you live normally after all that? And right, how could she? Wouldn't it be better to just sell the remaining portion of her life? It would be if her life was actually worth something. Just like Kusunoki, she's worth only 10,000 yen a year, the bare minimum. In Miyagi's eyes, she's just as worthless as he is. Neither of them contribute to society. Neither of them are happy. And above all, neither of them are loved. That's why, throughout the manga, any periods where she's being harsh is simply because she sees herself in him. The mistakes she's made, the futile attempts at hope, all of it is a reflection of her own circumstances. This scene acts as the first ever bonding moment we see between Kusunoki and Miyagi, and it's subtly beautiful. Two useless people in a useless world, finding momentary peace. That is Kusunoki and Miyagi. Throughout the story, Kusunoki and Himeno alike have been painted out as these egotistical children, holding themselves to a much higher standard than others simply for just existing. But that's not the full story, only the outside looking in. What Himeno and Kusunoki were after wasn't truly status or fame. No, something much more internal. What they both collectively wanted was something that validated their existence, something that made up for everything. The two never thought that they were better. The idea of fame and status was merely to elevate them to the same level as everyone else. Deep down, even as children, they weren't happy, and we see time and time again how that disillusionment has followed Kusunoki into the future. But what about Himeno? What is life like for her? It's time for us to finally figure out. According to Miyagi, circumstances would lead to Himeno giving birth to a child at 17. And following that, she would drop out of high school and get married at 18, but would get divorced only 2 years later. Now, at the age of 20, the same as Kusunoki, she's raising her child alone. And in 2 years' time, she'll be jumping to her death. So, that's that, right? Himeno got married, and though life seems to have been just as difficult for her, there's no need to meet up, is there? Logically, given Himeno's circumstances, there'd be no real reason for Kusunoki to intervene. However, while checking the pocket of his jeans, his own letter from the time capsule would almost force him to. A letter to himself in 10 years, strictly about Himeno, nothing else. In 10 years, find her, because she's hopeless without him. That was his request. So honoring it with the help of Miyagi, he goes to finally meet Himeno. But after ringing her doorbell, waiting, checking around, only to be met with no response, he considers giving up as he goes back to the festival where everything first started. And by complete chance, he runs into her. Himeno, 10 years later. Drowned in excitement, Kusunoki talks to Himeno enthusiastically. But because of the poor circumstances, they would have to pick up 2 days later at dinner. But for the first time, things are picking up for Kusunoki. He gets his hair cut, he goes out with Miyagi, and even changes his demeanor. It's everything that Kusunoki had been waiting for laid out on a silver platter. So when the day arrives, he's prepared. He's ready. The conversation with Himeno starts out perfect, and in some ways, they truly resonated with one another, until Kusunoki lets it slip. He sold off his lifespan for 10,000 yen a year. And while maybe that could be overlooked, what follows is a lot more, effectively dumping all the stress of recent life and its developments onto Himeno, including Miyagi, an invisible girl who for some reason only he can see. But even despite how crazy he sounds, how crazy he knows he sounds, Himeno believes him, confessing that she's been hiding something too. However, before she can disclose what it is, she takes a trip to the bathroom. And like you may be able to expect, Himeno never comes back, leaving a letter with the worker. The letter reading, "To my one and only childhood friend, I had intended to die in front of you. At the viewing platform, I had meant to have you wait below and fall down right next to you. Maybe you would say you didn't realize, but I always despised you. for never responding to my cries for help, then casually appearing before me now. I couldn't hate you more. So now that you consider me someone you can't do without, I thought I'd kill myself. But it seems you've gone even more insane than me in these last 10 years. It doesn't seem like it'll do any good getting revenge on you now, so I'm going to just quietly vanish. Goodbye. I only hope that what you said about having little time left to live is true. It's a heartbreaking final message that echoes the entirety of this story thus far. What did Miyagi tell Kusunoki about clinging to past relationships? About how he's neglected all his past relationships? About how he only clings to people when it's convenient for him? And wait, what did she say would happen if he met up with Himeno? From the very beginning, Miyagi had been trying to steer him away from this. The one thing that would shatter him where all else failed. Deep down, a part of Kusunoki had romanticized Himeno's entire existence. I mean, hell, literally a chapter ago, he claims that Himeno gave him life. The yen that he got for selling his lifespan, he wanted to give it to her. This was an inevitable moment. It truly, truly was. Everything built towards this. The reason why Kusunoki had tried his best to stay alone until this point was to avoid feeling like this. The money, it can go. It's not about that anymore. It's about the looming failure awaiting at every corner and the inability for his life to change. The hope that he's been holding out has betrayed him, just like that future possibility that Miyagi spoke of. So laying there, on the hard floor, feigning sleep, trying his best to waste away silently, Miyagi comforts him. But speaking of, hadn't Miyagi been there the whole time? Whether it was to call out hypocrisy or to blatantly shun him, wasn't she always there, silently caring? Even when his list of things to do before dying ran thin, Miyagi's stories had brought him comfort. Spending time with Miyagi had brought him comfort. He troubled her so much. That's why, as his life reaches its unfortunate end, he shouldn't trouble her any further. With his list of things to do before he dies finished, all that's left is to indulge in what he wants to do in his remaining few months. Embracing his hobbies, starting photography, all with Miyagi. And over time, as he pursues this subtle happiness, without even noticing it, life would begin changing. Rather than avoiding the way that he's lived his life, he begins to accept it. He notices the points where, because of his absence, things had changed, such as Himeno's case. When she needed him most, he wasn't there. Whatever feeling she had for him at one point would begin to sour. That was the result of Kusunoki's absence. Spending time with Miyagi brought forth all sorts of realizations and feelings, such as that one. But above all, it brought a sense of happiness. Stargazing, finding things to enjoy in the current moment, sharing their pain. It was a brief ray of hope, until one day, Miyagi would disappear and temporarily be replaced by another observer. This observer would be a lot more aggressive, especially upon hearing about how much trouble Kusunoki had brought Miyagi. But he'd also be very informative. Upon hearing about how Kusunoki's lifespan is supposedly worth 300,000 yen, the man would burst out laughing. And while remaining partially cryptic, he would simply tell Kusunoki to ask Miyagi for the truth. So that's what he did, taking Miyagi to someplace beautiful. Just like she had done for him the following days, he calmly asks her for an answer. Miyagi, why did you lie? Was it to secretly take a cut of his actual worth? Was Miyagi, the girl who had helped him so much, secretly evil, working for her own selfish motives? Far from it, and the truth is cutting. Miyagi lied about Kusunoki's worth to protect him. He wasn't worth 10,000 yen a year. Not more, just a measly 30 yen for every year of his life. In Miyagi's own words, at its core, it's the same reason why Kusunoki threw away the money. That feeling of loneliness, that feeling of sadness, that feeling of being hollow, those are the same reasons why she lied. Why she lied and gave Kusunoki a chunk of her own money. A desperate act of altruism was what it was. And even though she had given this stranger a chunk of her money, in the start, she really did believe that he was someone who was only worth 3 yen. Seeing his failures, the way that he lived his life. He was a sad, sad man. But at the same time, deep down, he was deeply caring. The act of talking to Miyagi even though no one else could see her, even at the cost of making himself look crazy, or holding an invisible girl's hand, all of that meant the world to her. He was the first one to treat her not as an invisible observer meant to watch the cruel last few moments as a man descends into insanity, but as a person. For that reason, it's why that arbitrary tag of 3 yen means nothing. Those people at the top don't know Kusunoki. All they can do is scale him based on values set by someone's own standard. And fortunately, like this manga has taught us, you cannot assign an objective value to human lives. You mean to tell us that Miyagi, someone who silently cares enough to give away her hard-earned money to someone she doesn't even know is worthless? Kusunoki, someone who silently struggled to find meaning since he was a boy, is worthless. That value, those numbers, none of them mean anything when they don't know the truth about the people they're weighing. If there's anything here to take away as we approach the end of this video, just remember, nothing can assign a person a value. Your work does not define you. School does not define you. Nothing, no system, no person, none of them can decide what you are worth. That is what this manga has been echoing at us since the very, very beginning. That day marked a new beginning for Kusunoki. That day would add one final thing to his list of things to do before he would die. To pay back all of Miyagi's yen that he threw away. But while pursuing this, once again without even realizing it, things would drastically begin changing. Around the town, Kusunoki had started becoming quite infamous. He was known as the man who would talk to an invisible girl wherever he went. A portion of people sneered at him. Others struggled to interpret why exactly he was doing that. But nearly half of everyone felt their mood improve upon seeing his strange antics. Why? Why were people so happy looking at him? The answer wasn't roundabout. It wasn't even mysterious. It was as simple as the fact that it looked like he was having fun. And eventually, all sorts of people would flock to him, curious about the mysterious girl, and interested in Kusunoki. And because of the spotlight, the attention, the friendship, it would make him realize something. From the start, the very beginning. All he wanted was to befriend people like this, but for the longest, he just couldn't. Not until he met Miyagi. Without even saying anything, Miyagi knew what he was going to do that following day. Kusunoki, despite being the happiest he'd been in the last 10 years, would sell the remaining few months of his life, attempting to scrounge up any money to pay back Miyagi's debt. And in doing so, Kusunoki is able to pay off a fraction. However, is left with only 3 days remaining until his death. Like we said earlier, once an individual is at 3 days remaining, their observer is no more. So Miyagi is gone. Left alone, his mind begins to wander. He wonders if Miyagi was even real at all. Not just that, but did he really even sell his lifespan at the shop? Did it exist? Everything becomes a blur. But at the same time, he really would have no way of knowing. Breaking out in tears as he tries to fabricate a story as to where Miyagi had gone, from behind him, he hears a voice all too familiar. But why? How? It's the same as what Kusunoki did. She sold off the remnants of her life, leaving all but 3 days. And though it's sad, in Kusunoki's mind, he thinks that's fine. He'll die leaving nothing behind, with no one to remember him, no one to mourn him, but that's okay. Because for the last few days of his life, and even long after, she'll be by his side. 2 people, both deemed worthless by the world, in the eyes of one another, are worth billions. For a while, I racked my brain hard to figure out how I wanted to frame this video. As you can see by the ending, there's not really a takeaway. Kusunoki's life doesn't magically get better. Miyagi's life doesn't magically get better. In the end, they're both doomed to die, not being remembered by anyone, not being loved, cared for. And though it's framed as almost a good thing, in plain sight it is still a tragedy. It's a very grounded ending, and a lot of people share that same sentiment surrounding the story. This isn't one where a takeaway is meant to be at the forefront, but more so the journey there, the lessons learned, the realizations. If anything, at least to me, this is commentary on the real life world. Before making this video, I asked one of my friends, if you could sell either time, health, or lifespan for money, would you do it? And he said no. He said that he wouldn't, but the reality is, he's already doing it. You're already doing it. I'm doing it as I'm editing this video, since this is my job. Every second you work, you are actively selling your time, your health, and by extension, your lifespan for monetary gain. This story takes something familiar that everyone has experienced to some degree, and frames it as something foreign. And in all honesty, I think that's genius. I didn't quite get that until my second time reading, but that is what I think is some pretty good writing. In the middle of that draining cycle, where every waking moment is spent working, selling away your being, we assign values to ourselves. It's normal, it happens. In fact, we assign values to ourselves based on a lot of things. I'm sure even subconsciously, you guys hold celebrities to a higher status. You think that they are worth more in the world. And that's just how it is. That's what some of us are even taught. But this manga about two worthless people shows otherwise. No matter what, you can't assign value to a life. Sure, you could assign a value based on some random person's metrics, but then again, that's not objective. Even if you could assign a value, it wouldn't mean anything, because that's your interpretation. Do you guys know the quote, "The beauty is in the eye of the beholder"? That is a message that rings all too true in the context of this manga. I really enjoyed seeing Kusunoki's developments. I think that with stories like this, characters are oftentimes granted sort of miraculous endings, which I'm not the biggest fan of. I think it takes a chunk of what could have made for a grounded experience, all the more realistic, and kind of undercuts that. But in I Sold My Life for 10,000 yen a year, it doesn't really ever do that. Kusunoki is forced to sit with his failures, and whether he learns from them or not, his fate is still sealed. Part of me was afraid that towards the end the shop would be like, it's just a joke, you still have your life. So I was really glad when I saw that the story stayed true to its message. It hit me very deeply. I don't want to get too personal with this video. That's kind of what I've been trying to avoid by framing this in the way that I have. But as most of you guys know, I love doing YouTube, but sometimes I kind of assign myself this value. I tend to connect myself to my channel. If my channel does bad, then that's a reflection of me as a person. Now, I know that for a lot of you guys, that might seem over the top or extra, but, you know, YouTube is what I love doing. This, to a pretty fair degree, is my life. It's what I'm passionate about. It's what I love. And like with things that you love, that just naturally tends to happen. So yeah, to some degree, this video really did resonate with me. It's hard to think, but some days you really have to step back and just think, this does not determine your value. That does not determine your value. Kusunoki and Miyagi are two worthless individuals in a world just as worthless. A world that thinks it can rank people based on what? I love that framing, and it holds true. The two of them teach us the true meaning of value through trial and error, realizations, in the harsh swallow of the brutal pill known as reality. Thank you all so much for watching. It's been Whadasha. Please let me know what you guys think about this manga. I'm very curious. What stood out to you? Who do you resonate with more? Let me know all those things. If you did enjoy, please consider subscribing and leaving a like. If you frequent my content, consider becoming a member. You'll get to experience all these videos early, and you will have more perks in the future. With that said, thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you guys later.